Now, going back to Genesis 3, verse 14, upon the serpent's belly shalt thou go. So you'll be an abomination and a cursed thing. And dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. Now, we wonder about the word dust. God says, dust the serpent will eat. Now, we wonder because dust is a word that identifies with mankind. If we go back to Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, and Jehovah God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So God formed man of the dust, and yet God continues to consider man as dust. In Psalm 103, verse 14, for he knoweth our frame, he remembereth that we are dust. And that's speaking of all men. In Psalm 104, it says in verse 29, thou hidest thy face, they are troubled. Thou takest away their breath, they die and return to the dust. We came from the dust, and we return to the dust. In Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 7, then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. We can find many similar verses that relate dust to man, dust and mankind. Now, dust also identifies with death in a couple of these verses, because when you return to the dust, that's dying. You've gone to the grave and you've ceased to live. Your spirit has left you. So that's something we have to keep in mind. There is a similar verse, similar sounding, to Genesis 3:14 concerning eating the dust in Isaiah chapter 65, in verse 25. The wolf and the lamb shall feed together, and the lion shall eat straw like the bullock, and dust shall be the serpent's meat. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, saith Jehovah. Dust shall be the serpent's meat. Now here it would seem, because of the language of the wolf and lamb feeding together, and the lion eating straw like the bullock, it's language in this context especially that if we go back to verse 17 where God's speaking of a new heavens and new earth, and therefore it's language befitting a sort of renewed Eden, that God has made a new heaven and new earth where all will be well once again and perfect, and there will be no sin, no death, and whatever creatures are there, they will be at peace with one another. They will not be destroying one another in any way, and so forth. But that's what makes the statement about the serpent stand out. It doesn't seem to fit unless we do understand that when it says dust shall be the serpent's meat, that the dust would identify with a return to death, or death itself, as man goes to the dust, and the graves are in the dust. Therefore, hell is in the dust, and so the serpent's meat would be death. It would be dead forever in the new heavens and new earth. We know that is the actual case because the rest of the Bible teaches us that Satan will be destroyed and he will cease to exist. He will not go on forevermore, and therefore in Satan's eternal destruction, it's an eternal death for him and all the fallen angels, and therefore identification with the dust. But there seems to be another point to God's statement that dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life, because that is making reference to Satan's existence in time, because it's speaking of days, and days are a time reference. And time is confined to this creation with the sun, the moon, and the stars as the timekeepers. And therefore, all the days of the serpent's life would involve all of Satan's existence from this point in the Garden of Eden throughout the whole history of the world. We know that he has existed because he's not a man, and men have died after a certain number of years. All men die, but these fallen angels, they do not die like men in that sense. They'll have to be destroyed by God at the very end. And so Satan has existed up until now, over 13,000 years of history. All the days of his life, he has continued on. And that's why, remember 1 John, that statement concerning the Antichrist. It says in 1 John chapter 4, verse 3, "And every spirit that confesseth not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God. And this is that spirit of Antichrist, whereof ye have heard that it should come, and even now already is it in the world." So the Antichrist will come, that is, at the end of time. And John, the apostle, is writing in the 1st century A.D. as the Holy Spirit moves him. The Antichrist will come about 2,000 years from now, from the point of John's writing. And already now, in the 1st century A.D., is in the world. And that's what proves it's Satan, because no man could have existed and lived in the 1st century and still be alive in the 21st century. It's not possible. And yet it is possible for Satan, the Antichrist, who was in the Garden of Eden, not only in the 1st century A.D., but he was way back in the year 11,013 B.C., and he was around at the time of Christ when Jesus entered into the world, and when John was writing, and all through New Testament history, all the way to the end. That's all the days of the serpent's life, and yet his lifespan will be limited to this creation. When God destroys this world, he will destroy the serpent. The serpent will be annihilated, as all the fallen angels will be, and they will cease to exist. Therefore, the dust that he eats all the days of his life must be something else. Well, we find from that verse in Isaiah 65, the word meat is also used in Psalm 14, verse 4. And here God is speaking about sinners, and he says, "Have all the workers of iniquity no knowledge, who eat up my people as they eat bread, and call not upon Jehovah?" The word bread is the word meat. Workers of iniquity eat up my people as they eat meat, and call not upon Jehovah. And the word eat is the same as in Genesis, that he will eat the dust all the days of his life. And here the unsaved are eating up God's people like meat. And remember, what is an identification with people or mankind? Dust. So if you're eating up people like meat, it could also be understood you're eating dust like meat. And so we see that there could be a relationship here, and there is actually, between Satan eating up man and meat for the serpent, or eating up the dust all the days of his life.